the future of work, hybrid work, remote work. Frankly, I'm inclined right now, it's work.
It's just work, yeah.
And you happen to be remote. You often are in Terminal C in O'Hare Airport and you're working.
Right.
Or you're in Northern California or wherever you are, creating that sense of team with all the dimensions of work, hybrid, remote, and every iteration thereof. What do you have to say about how to keep that team, that leadership, that communication going with this new paradigm, if you will?
I mean, I appreciate the question and the context, because you're right. It's like, this is just work. It's different. It's messy. It's evolving. It's changed a lot, especially in the last 5 years. But look, even 5 years ago, pre-COVID, the world was changing, work was changing. And I would often get the question, what you're asking in the context of like, well, how do I manage my remote team? It's different than my, team in the office.
Right.
And
how
I
do
would
we
often
create teamwork and team building, but remotely?
But then in those days, it's the same, to me, it's the same answer, even though it's gotten more complex. It's like, I would often say back then, like, you just have to work harder, in the sense you have to be more intentional about it. Because again, but if we take the example, let's just say you work in an environment where everyone comes to the office every day and we go to lunch and we like the old days, right? There's still no guarantee that we're going to have a great team and we're going to be connected. And there's like, yeah, we're in the same physical space. That does create a little bit more opportunity than if we're not in the same physical space. But ultimately, what it took to be a great leader 10 years ago might be a little different today. And there's more avenues and aspects of complexity, but it's still about a commitment to it, an intentionality, and really thinking through, given the dynamic nature of my team and the industry in which I work or the company and how we're set up, how can I as a leader and how can we as a team communicate and collaborate with each other as best as possible? Again, I mean, even you and I talking on this podcast and recording in this format, it's like 20 years ago, this didn't exist. But you and I could still, when we met 20 years ago we could still have a conversation. Now we're just doing it in a different context with different technology and a different format because this now exists. But the nature of the conversation that we're having is still essentially the same as maybe we would have had 20 years ago, human to human. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like what it takes to be a great leader, what it takes to be a great team, the fundamentals are still the same. We just have to adapt it to today's world.
And I don't know if this is obvious, and I don't want to throw everything on sociology and generations, but it is a fact that if you're a boomer, an Xer, millennial, Y, Z, born digital, whatever it is, you do relate to work differently, especially in this post-COVID or even pre-COVID, just this technological boom and aspect to it, right? So I am learning, and I've challenged myself because I love in person. Yeah. And I love the electricity in the elevator or at the water cooler or in an impromptu hallway encounter. And hey, Mike, Jenny down the hall, you know her better, but she seemed like, would you go check in on her? Something like that. Well, the challenge is, how do you do that digitally, or how do you do that hybrid, or how do you do that remotely? And, as a leader myself of my own company, my own organization, I've come to kind of learn that each individual responds in a different way and requires a little bit tailored way to interact. One is, for example, through WhatsApp. Another one likes more thoughtful emails. Another one is good with WhatsApp voice memos, and it's, if you manage 90 people, maybe that could drive you crazy and you have to find a way to optimize it. But like you said, it's a new world. Yeah. If you want something new, you got to behave in a new way,
Totally. Well, and I like your approach to this, Seth. I think customizing it to the people you actually lead. And again, the bigger the organization, the more people, the more challenging it gets. You're right, because you got to scale it. And there does need to be some kind of, here's how we communicate. Are we using Slack? Are we using Teams? Are we, and look, sometimes you just have to adjust to that. But I do think utilizing the technology and then customizing how we're going to interact with different people in a way that works for them and works for us. You mentioned the voice memo thing. My wife and I have been together for 25 years. We now communicate a lot via text voice message because she loves it because I can't interrupt her and ask her questions. So she gets to just finish a thought. But it ends up being,
what did you mean by that?
Right.
No.
But it ends up being this funny thing that like we actually voice message each other in the mornings, or like we're out on walks, or we're sharing things with each other. And it's actually opened up this new avenue of communication for us in our marriage, 25 years in, where we communicate pretty well as it is. We love each other very much, but it actually has created this other dynamic that I'm like, wow, this is cool. And again, that's in our marriage, right? But if you think about this with your team, even finding out what's the most effective way for us to communicate with each other,
Yeah.
and or am I doing certain things in the way that I'm communicating? It could be, again, you and I could be the same age, have the same background, so it's not even a generational thing, although to your point, those that can have an impact, but just it's a preference thing,
Yeah, exactly,
right?
exactly. Right, because there's introverts, there's extroverts, there's ambiverts, there's people
Yeah.
that, work in the morning or do better in the afternoon. Totally. And I've asked, is this work for you? Is this okay? And then I know, then I have kind of my pathway,
Yeah.
right?
And that's an aspect, by the way, going back to our conversation about authenticity, like being an authentic leader is about, right, removing the self-righteousness, which is I'm right, this is the right way to communicate, and adding the vulnerability, which is like, does this work for you? And please tell me the truth, because they might say, actually, it doesn't, and here's what does. And then as a leader, you might be like, well, I don't know if I can communicate that way or if I want to communicate that way. But then we're going to have to make some compromise and adjust accordingly. Because again, the old school model of leadership is like, it's my way, you adjust to me.
Yeah.
Whereas in today's world, you still can be in charge and be the leader. And when push comes to shove, if it's a tie, it's going to go to the leader, or you're going to default to like, hey, it's my company or it's my team. So
Yeah.
we're going to operate this way. But ultimately, the more conscious negotiation we can do so that we customize it, and to use, curate, as you talk about, really curate it in such a way so that it really fits the team that we have, then we're going to actually perform better.